Hello the internet, my name's Lara and welcome back to my channel. This is going to be our second episode of Grow a Green Thumb. This episode I'm going to be talking about the mixes of different soils and which ones that you will want for particular types of plants. This is still going to be a 102 level, a little bit basic, getting up there a little bit, you know. By the end of this you should feel pretty confident in mixing some soil for, you know, some of the more basic types of plants. So if you are interested in that, stick around. So like I said in my first video, where I talked about soil, water, and light, one of the things that I said about soil is that soil has two basic reasons for existing. Two basic reasons why we put our plants into it. That is, number one, it gives the plant a little bit of structure so that it does not fall over. It also is a way for water and nutrients to be delivered to the roots of the plant. So what I didn't go into any detail on, because it was a 101 course and now we're getting a little more in depth, is that not only is soil there to bring water and nutrients to the roots of the plant, but it is also there in order to make sure that there is not too much water touching the roots of the plant. Basically, if there's too little water, your plant is going to shrivel. It's not going to get the water it needs, it's going to shrivel up and die. If it gets too much water, then it's going to get root rot, and it will also then shrivel and die because it's not getting any water. There are three main parts of any soil that you are going to use to pot up your plants. You want to make sure that that soil has something that will retain water. It will have something that will give your roots aeration. And then there are nutrients in there somewhere. Because your plant needs to have enough water, but not too much water, and it also needs nutrients in order to survive. Okay? So three basic things. Now, the astute of you might be able to say, so can we replace soil with something else that will give the plant these things? Yes, the answer to that is yes. The answer to that is also that we're not going to go into that right now. That will be a higher level course, obviously. But for right now, we're just going to stick with soil because that is just the most basic. It's the easiest to comprehend. It's the easiest to deal with. So we're going to stay with soil. So now the question is, of course, how do you decide what type of soil is going to be the best for different types of plants? That is the question. That is the question that everybody is trying to deal with. And it is the reason why if you go and watch 100 different plant tuber videos on how they create their soil, you are going to get 100 different, I mean, you might even get more. You might even get 200 different soil recipes, right? Because basically, even people who have been doing this for a while, even people who are in the know, you know, we're always tweaking. We're always learning new things, we're tweaking, we're seeing what works in our environment and all that kind of stuff. So what I want to do is give you the very basics of three of the different soil. There's lots of threes in this series, I'm noticing. Things come in three. But three different soil types that are generally the ones that I mix. And then I'm going to give you the parts, the different ingredients that I put into those mixes. And the most important thing is I'm going to tell you why. Because when you go and you see a lot of videos out there of people mixing their soils, they'll be like, oh, I put, 60% of this in, and then I put 20% of this in, and I put 10% of this and 10% of that. Maybe I'll add a handful of blah, blah, blah. What I want you to understand is, why is there so much of whatever that first thing was, that was the 60%? What is the point of the 20%? What is the point of each of these ingredients? Because really, the percentages only matter to a certain amount. I mean, like, if you're sitting there with a cup measurement and you're like, 1, 2, 3, like, you can do that. If that's the way, that you can feel confident in your soil, go for it. For the most part, though, what you're going for is a specific feel and a specific you're basically going for a specific feel of the soil. And obviously that's only going to come with experience. I'm going to give you, hopefully, the knowledge that you need so that you can start on that, and then you'll make your tweaks as you go. I'm going to go over the 3 different types of soil that I generally create. As a quick overview, it is what I call my general all-purpose mix, which is basically any plant that I have that does not fall under the other 2. So my general purpose mix, then I have my succulent cactus mix. I put some my peperomias in there too. And then I have my orchid mix, which is for orchids and aroids. And we're going to go over the ingredients in all of those. And then I'm going to show you how you can tell which one of these mixes is the one that you want for your particular plant. Because obviously sometimes you're going to be able to go to the internet and be like, okay, I have a philodendron Prince of Orange, and they like a well-draining soil, but that holds a decent amount of moisture. They like to dry out in between waterings, but they don't ever like to go too long without water. You know, and so you'll be able to know, okay, I'm probably going to go with the general purpose mix for that one. But other times you're not really going to know. And like I said, you want to be able to adapt to your own environment. You want to be able to adapt to your own watering habits. First off, we're going to go with the general purpose mix. So my general purpose mix, and then like I said, I'm going to go through this, and I've been tweaking this as I go. So I feel silly because I feel like I'm supposed to be like, you know, telling you definitively. But one of the other things that I really want to get through in this series is that as much as YouTubers sound like they know what they're doing, and they do have experience, I'm not saying that they don't, and they have good wisdom to impart on you. A lot of this stuff is guesswork, and it's stuff that we're continually changing, continually working on, being like, oh, well, that didn't work, you know, and changing the plan, right? So for right now, this is what my general all-purpose mix looks like. And obviously, I'm going to explain why I have each of those bits. Okay, so the first ingredient, and the one that I put the most of it in, is Coco Core. So Coco Core is a substrate that is created from the husks of coconuts. It's very renewable. It retains water, like really retains water. It's really fun to like let it soak up water and then you just squeeze it all out, and like it's like a sponge basically. So I'm putting this into the middle of the video because I actually, when I filmed this video, did not have any Coco Core with like, I had used up all of my Coco Core. Coco Core also requires a little bit of extra work because of the way that it comes. It generally comes in brick form like this, and then you add water to it, and then it becomes the thing that you're going to actually put in with your soil. I've gone looking online for Coco Core. The best price that I've found, and the one that I generally get, is actually not for plants at all. It's actually called Eco Earth, and it's coconut core, but this is the type of, they sell this in order to go in the bottom of reptile cages. And I don't know whether that makes it cheaper because people are like gouging the heck out of plant people right now because like there's so many people doing plants because of the virus or whatever. But this is 3 bricks. So it has 3 of these in it. And each compressed brick will make 7 to 8 liters of substrate. So this expands, and I'm going to show you in a minute how that expands. This 3 bricks cost me $7.69. And basically that's the best price that I've found. I get these off of Petco's website. This is Coco Core. It comes like this. You can find it in nurseries, plant stores. You can also go to Petco. You'll be able to buy them by the brick. If you're you don't want to go for the whole. There's also the possibility that this quality is different from the quality that you will get if you like buy it specifically for plants, but I have not had any problems. This stuff has worked really well for me. I have a whole bunch of plants planted in it. I have not had any whatever, but I haven't done a whole lot of research. So if you're going for, you know, whatever's the cheapest I can get, this Eco Earth stuff's pretty awesome. And then if you want to expand and try and find some other things, you go right ahead. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys how or how you expand this real quick, just so that you have a basic. It actually does come with instructions on here of how to rehydrate it. It's not hard, but I'll show you because that's what this video is supposed to be for. Okay, so I took the brick and put it in here. Even if you buy the thing with the 3, you basically only want to do 1 at a time. You're going to be surprised at how big it expands to. All right, and now we're going to put the water on here. Warmer water will generally work a little bit better. But for the most part, you have to like put some water in there and then you let it soak for a bit. So there, we're going to let it soak, and then we will come back in a little bit to see what has happened. Okay, so I actually forgot about this and came back the next day, but as you can see, that little brick turned into this whole big thing. And so, as you can see, once you've gotten it to this, then that's when you can use it as part of your soil mixture, obviously. But for the most part, the main part of my general purpose soil is that. I use this general purpose soil, like I said, for philodendrons, begonias, alocasias, all plants that like their water. The second main part of basically any soil that I do create is perlite. Perlite are those little white, I mean, you've probably seen them before, even if you don't know. They're those little white balls where they're you know, they sit in the soil, and you look at that and you're like, that doesn't look like soil. Why is that thing in there? It looks like plastic. It feels like plastic. They are not plastic. I don't know exactly what they are. Hello, perlite, what are you? As far as I know, perlite is some sort of a mineral that they somehow puff. And the perlite is what is the most easy and cheap way to add aeration into your soil. So you've got your coconut core, which is holding your water. So you want to have some of that. And then the perlite itself is making sure that the soil doesn't get too compact. It helps keep airflow going through there. It also sucks up some of the water itself and holds water, like the perlite will actually hold some of the water. So those are usually the 2 main ingredients in my general purpose soil. The fertilizer part is that I put in some, but less. So it's mainly Coco Core, there's some perlite, and then I put in a little bit of Miracle-Gro potting soil. Most of the reason for that is that it's got the fertilizer in it. I mean, say what you will about Miracle-Gro, the fertilizer that they put in their plant mixes works. I mean, it really just does. If you don't want to use Miracle-Gro potting soil or some other potting, like all-purpose potting soil in there, the other option are worm castings. They are literally the bits that come off of worms, and then they collect them, and then you mix a certain amount in your soil. The bags of worm castings will actually even give you how much you're supposed to put in there. It's like 1 cup per 3 cups of soil. So it's a pretty decent amount, but that itself will give your plant fertilizer. I've been playing around with Miracle-Gro versus worm castings. I don't have a definitive answer on which one I like better. So while I've given you the ingredients, you've got Coco Core, perlite, and then some sort of nutrient thing, either Miracle Grow, worm castings. You're going to want to start out with something like a 60-30-10 blend of those. It's going to be somewhere right around there. I'm giving you the numbers because I know that you guys have to start somewhere, right? So 60% Coco Core, 30% Perlite, 10% either all-purpose potting mix, worm castings, something like that. If you have compost, if you're one of those people who composts, that would work really well too, because that has nutrients and all that kind of stuff in it. At the same time, even though this is a general purpose thing, I know that alocasias and begonias like a little bit more water than philodendrons. So for the most part, sometimes I will use a little bit less perlite when I am creating my begonia or alocasia mix. I will either use a little more perlite for my philodendrons, or sometimes I will throw a little bit of orchid bark in there. We haven't talked about orchid bark yet, but orchid bark is also an aeration thing, because you can get different sizes of it, but they're pieces. And so obviously, you know, it's harder for soil to compact around those. It's going to help with the airflow. So even within the general all-purpose mix, you can mess around with how much stuff you want. If your plant is a heavy feeder, you know that it really likes a lot of fertilizer, you can add a little bit more of that. If you're the type of person who wants to use fertilizer in your water, obviously we haven't talked about this yet, but if you are the type of person who already fertilizes and you do that like in your water, or you put in sticks, or you put something like that, obviously you want to put a little less fertilizer into the soil. You don't want to soil burn your plants. That is the general all-purpose mix. Play around with it. I mean, you know, go for the 60-30-10. You know, if you just want something that's gonna, you know, work and be a pretty, you know, all-around thing, that's great. If you want to go even more basic than that, and maybe I should have said this first, you can just buy general all-purpose potting mix and put some extra perlite in it. The major weakness of pre-bagged potting mixes is generally that they don't put enough perlite in there. So, you know, if you just want to go basic, get your all-purpose mix, put a little bit of extra perlite in there until, you know, it feels lighter. Like, I don't know how much to tell you to put in, but, you know, until it feels lighter, like there's just more movement in it. And that'll do you. Okay? All right, so that was the general all-purpose mix. We're going to go into the succulent mix, and it's actually not all that different. A lot of people will say that they don't want to use coconut core in their succulents and cacti because it is such a water retainer. I think that this comes down to, again, learning how you water. You know, are you the type of person who waters a little bit too much? Are you a person that waters a little too little? I haven't been having any trouble with my coconut core in my plants. I apologize for all the noise in the background. People. Anyway, like I said, I haven't been having any trouble with the coconut core. I'm playing around with possibly shifting to peat moss instead, which is a similar substance to coconut core in that it is a water retainer, but it doesn't hold quite as much water as coconut core, which is better for succulents and cacti. So basically what I do with this, because, you know, if you're paying attention, you can see that if I'm using coconut core, it's going to be very similar to my all-purpose mix, or my general mix. The main difference is that I go 50-50 on the coconut core and the perlite. So, however much coconut core I put in there, I put the same amount of perlite. Then I will add in the cactus and succulent mix, Miracle Grow, as opposed to the all-purpose potting mix, because it's got a little less water retaining in there, but it's still got the fertilizer. And if I know that it is a plant that wants even less water retention, I will also add silica sand. There are different types of sand that you can use. I did a little bit of research into it and found that they said play sand, you know, the type of sand that you would put in a box for children, which is basically the easiest type to find. The grains are so small that the sand itself compacts. Whereas silica sand is a little bit larger, the granules are larger, and thus water moves through it more easily. But I had to special order silica sand. So you could probably get away with just doing some regular sand as long as you don't put too much. If it mixes all within your soil, you're probably going to be fine with that. So coconut coir or peat moss for your water retention, perlite, and possibly sand for your aeration, and then some sort of a cactus potting mix for your fertilizer or worm castings. I haven't mixed up any succulent soil recently, so I actually haven't tried worm castings. I assume that would be fine. You know, it's just going to be depending on what you've got. If it's easier for you to get potting mix, get that. If it's easier for you to get worm castings, get that. And then that is my general succulent mixture. And the third type of soil, that I got is for my orchids. It would also be really good for aeroids. I don't think I have any aeroids. Yeah, I do not have any aeroids, but the type of roots, I'm going to show you guys some roots later, or in a little bit, and I'll show you the orchid roots. And aeroid roots are very similar to orchid roots. So orchids, for those of you who don't know, grow in rainforests, and they do not grow in soil. They grow on the barks of trees, and then they hold themselves on the barks of trees, and then water falls because it's a freaking rainforest, and it waters the roots of the plant. It basically waters the whole plant, but it waters the roots of the plant, and then the water goes away for a little while, and then it rains again in short order because it's a rainforest. Plants like this are called epiphytes, and they do not like a tight or wet potting mix. Like, they want really well draining, like even more so than succulents, because succulents and cacti want well draining. Orchids actually want really high aeration. So for the orchid mixes that I have been putting together, and I haven't put this together perfectly yet. Again, I'm still playing around with it. But what I do is I have Orchid Bark. That is my main substrate is Orchid Bark. And I have pretty big pieces, so you get a lot of aeration out of that already. So Orchid Bark, Perlite, because Perlite improves the aeration but also retains some water. I also put in sphagnum moss, which is something we haven't discussed yet. Sphagnum moss is it's actually a plant. It is a moss, and it generally, you can get them in short fibered or long fibered. I tend to have the long fibered ones. They're very good at holding a specific amount of water and also adding aeration. Are you noticing a theme with the orchid? It holds water, but it adds aeration. It holds water, but it adds aeration. It holds water, but it adds aeration. Yeah. And then I will often add a little bit of peat moss to that, just as a little extra water retention. I tend to underwater my orchids, so if you're going to leave anything out, leave out the peat moss. Just do the orchid bark, the perlite, and the sphagnum moss. And you're probably going to do that at basically equal amounts of all of those. My orchid bark that I get is also the Miracle Grow orchid bark, which has the fertilizer in it. If you get just straight orchid bark, you're going to obviously need to add some worm castings or fertilizer of some variety. But the main point that you want to do when you are creating an orchid mix is you want it to retain water, you also want it to be very aerating, and you want it to be very draining. So you want to have all three. I know, it's a lot of fun. It's really not as hard as it sounds. I'm gonna mix up my orchid mop. So here's my orchid mix. I've got some of the orchid bark, obviously. I'm not gonna use quite that much. I got a little excited. I'm gonna do about that much. I'm going to put in some Perlite. And mix that up. You know, as you're getting to know this, one of the things you want to do is mix up in between each step, because then you can kind of see, oh look, that's about how much Perlite there is in there, right? So you can kind of see whether or not you think that's enough. My next thing I'm going to do, put in some of this sphagnum moss, but because this is so, I'm going to have to see, let's see if I can, how well I can mix it. I feel like I might want to come in here and cut some of these longer bits. It's been a while since I've done an orchid mix, though. Yeah, that's too much sphagnum moss. Okay, there we go. I'm liking that. All right, and so any of these bits that are too big or too long, you can just rip those apart. The sphagnum moss is still going to work just as well, even if you do that. So, as you can see, we've ended up with a fairly light, airy looking kind of mix, right? And I've got my orchid bark, which has the fertilizer and the substance. I've got the perlite for aeration, and I've got the perlite for water and aeration, and I've got the sphagnum moss for water and aeration. And I am actually going to add a little bit of peat moss. I'm not going to add much because I'm not sure exactly how much I want of that to be in there. Okay, yeah, see, I only added a little bit, and I'm actually pretty happy already with what that has done to the mix. All right, so there you go. I let you in on my first mixing of this type of orchid mix. I don't know how it's going to work yet, but, you know, this is just me looking at this, and this is just, you know, I've seen a lot of different soils, right? I've done this so much when I look at that and I'm like, I can kind of tell, okay, I think that's going to hold the right amount of soil, or I mean the right amount of water, and I think that's going to have the right amount of aeration. I could be completely wrong, but I might not be. There are other substrates that people will use. I have them on a list because I don't even remember all of them, and there's probably more than I even have on this list. There is lava rock, either in red and black. What I understand those to be is they are an aeration. They're like the rocks. I mean, they're literally rocks, very porous rocks. They will suck in water, and they'll also add aeration. But they are rocks, so they're kind of heavy. There's also pumice, which is similar to lava rock, only it's actually closer to being perlite. But it's tiny little rocks. It has different minerals in it than the lava rock, and that's how the two of them are different, because for a long time I was like, these are both interchangeable. They're both lava rocks, but pumice and lava rock are different. You can get pumice. Try that out with or in exchange for perlite, but otherwise don't worry about it. There's also vermiculite, which is also very similar to perlite, but is a different shape. There's activated charcoal, which some people swear by. I think the purpose of that is to absorb any bad bacteria. I have not ever played around with that. You can put little bits of terracotta like pots terracotta, you can actually get little bits of terracotta and put them in there. That absorbs water and also helps with aeration. And then there are little things called mosquito bits, which you can put into your soil, and that helps to keep any bugs from being inside there. I'm not going to go into great detail on these other things. I just want you to know that they exist. So if you see them, go ahead and play with them, but also know that you can get by without them. You know, and it could be the type of thing where you can really find vermiculite very easily, whereas you can't find perlite or pumice very easily, and you can use vermiculite instead of perlite. Hopefully that is clear enough. If I'm not being clear enough about that, go ahead and ask in the comments, and I'll do my best to clear up any questions you have about that. I just wanted to throw these things at you guys because when you get to the level where you start wanting to mix your own soil, sometimes you just go for it. Like, some people really just are like, oh my gosh, mixing soil, and it is like the thing that they have always wanted to do like forever in their life, and they didn't even know about it. And so I'm going to give you that information. If you don't want to mess with it, just stick with those basic examples and basic substrates that I gave you earlier. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to do for you is to show you the roots of some different plants. So that you kind of get an idea of what you're looking for when you're repotting your plant. If you're not sure what type of soil it wants, you would have seen in my first video, you know, plants that have thick leaves, plants that have thick stems, tend to like to be watered less than plants that have thin stems and thin leaves. Same thing for the roots. I avoided going into too much detail on that in the 101 video because I didn't necessarily want you guys just going and pulling your plants out of pots when you don't need to. You can shock plants if they get messed around with too much. It's not going to be a danger for many of your like regular type plants, but it is a thing to be aware of, that, you know, moving plants are made to just kind of be put into the ground and then they just stay in one spot their entire life. They're not used to, oh, I've got this size pot, and then I've got this size pot, and then I'm moving to this window, and then I'm moving to that window, and then, oh my gosh, it's, you know, suddenly it's 60 degrees, suddenly it's 40 degrees, you know. So plants can get stressed out by that. That's why when you bring plants home from the nursery, the general rule of thumb is you don't repot it for at least 2 weeks. Some people do, and they have perfect luck. Other people do it and their plant die. It's plants. You'll figure out what your thing is going to be. But anyway, I'm going to insert some video that I took earlier of me repotting one of my begonias, and so that you can see the roots on there. And then when you get back from that, I'm going to be going through and showing you some roots of some other of my plants, so that I can kind of explain to you which of the potting mixes to use for which type of plants, so that you can tell that without necessarily having to look it up. I thought you guys might like to see, as a little bonus, my repotting of my Begonia Brad's Halloween. I am, however, running very low on dirt, so I'm going to have enough for this, but I'm not going to have much after this, so. See what this guy looks like as he comes out of here. Hopefully he comes out of here. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. And as you can see, so this guy is a little bit root bound, but not really that bad. And as you can see, the roots on this guy are very, very thin and fine. Like, even as large as this plant is, right? All the roots are very, very fine. I'm going to be doing a, oh, that's a little bit too high. I'm going to be filming my, Soil 101 video pretty soon. So that is, when you've got little fine roots like that, then you definitely know that the plant is not storing a whole bunch of water in the roots, right? Because the roots just aren't built to hold a whole lot of water. And basically, because this plant has stems that are not really all that, they're not all that plump for the size of the plant. This is how you could tell that begonias are not the type of plant that, or that's how you can kind of tell that begonias are the type of plant that need to be watered pretty often. Because their roots are really thin. They don't really have thick stems or tough stems of any kind. And their leaves are very floppy. So their leaves, nothing about a begonia holds in a lot of water, right? So if you were to look at a begonia, in a store, even if you didn't know what a begonia was, if you knew those tricks, if you know those things to look for, then you would know that the begonia is going to need more water than less water. The exact amount of water, obviously, is something you have to figure out for your style, your house, your everything like that. But you can at least go in with an educated guess of how much water your plant is going to need if you pay attention to those kinds of things, right? Because that's what I am trying to do for you guys, is to teach you the whys of all the plant care so that you can make better educated guesses. Because you're not always going to be able to find the exact plant on the internet. You're not always going to be able to find an exact care guide. You're going to have to guess on some of this stuff sometimes. And the more familiar you are with recognizing things like that in plants where someone can say, hey, begonias like a lot of water, the more easily you're going to be able to make those decisions for yourself. Okay, so you've just seen the begonia roots video that I had just taken. You can see how thin and fine those roots are. And that's why that plant, I'm not going to say that this is like 100% every plant. You're going to be like, oh, if it's got super tiny roots, then it wants a lot of water. You've got to take into account the entire plant, obviously. But this is just a good thing to be aware of, all right? So I have pulled a couple of other plants that I hope will be a good indication, a good variety of different types of plants. This is an alocasia. Alocasias in general like to be watered fairly well, and a little more heavily when they're putting out new leaves. This plant just put out this new leaf here. This new leaf here, and it has just about hardened. But it is also just the tiniest bit root bound. Or it's not root bound necessarily, but the roots are starting to come out the bottom. So I figure this has probably got a pretty nice root system for you guys to look at. There we go. Okay, so here are the roots. I'm trying to do this without getting dirt everywhere. Here are the roots on this alocasia. So it does have some of the thicker looking roots here, right? And then it has a lot of the little fine roots. You notice this is different than the begonia, even though the begonia and this plant both like a lot of water. This one does have some thicker roots on it. So this is a thing where you wouldn't necessarily look at that and be like, oh, well, it doesn't want a lot of water. Because you also have to take into account the fact that it doesn't have super thick stems and it doesn't have super thick leaves. So, but that is what the roots on an alocasia look like. And we'll put that back in his little pot. Okay, philodendron. This is a philodendron black cardinal. I'm not sure how many roots this guy's got, but we're gonna pull them out and see. But again, this is another one of the general, the alocasia was a general purpose mix. Philodendron is also a general purpose mix. Let's see what we got here. Oh, isn't that cute? Alright, this is going to be a little harder to see. The roots on this guy are actually red, so the roots can be different colors. And as you can see this one's even hanging down, not super thick roots. Decent size for the plant. And obviously, decent size for the plant and small for the plant are, you know, you're just going to have to see roots before you'll be able to tell that. So, this guy, because he's not storing a lot of water in his roots, but his stem here is okay, you know, like size, and the leaves are still papery. So he's kind of in the middle of, I want some water, but not a ton of water, and obviously not less, like low water. Okay, this is another guy that's going to be, this is a Haworthia that I have put in a different pot, so I don't know the species names. It's a Haworthia. I had to up-pot it at one point, so we'll see if all the roots have grown out there. This guy I really wanted you to see. And I'm going to pull some of the dirt away from the roots on this. Because Haworthias tend to have... So if you look at the size of the plant, and then you look at the size of the roots on this guy, they're pretty big for the size of this plant, right? Haworthias obviously are storing a lot of water inside of their leaves, and that's why the leaves are so thick, but they are also storing a lot of water inside of their roots. And so that is definitely a thing where you want to, they don't want to be watered a whole lot. They're a succulent, it makes sense. And you want to have a really well-draining soil for that, because the roots are thick, the leaves are thick, you know, like this is a plant that doesn't need a lot of water all the time. And if you let it kind of shrivel, like this particular plant, actually, I had let it go for a while without watering it, and the leaves had started to go a little bit squishy soft. I watered it yesterday, it has plumped back up, it's fine, you know, and the soil obviously is not too wet. It's a little damp still, but it's not too wet. So that guy's going to be fine for 2 or 3 weeks at least. We love plants, so we don't have to water too much. Laura does. Laura loves plants, it's just not to water too much. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to show you guys was this Calathea. Mostly because it actually does need to be repotted, though I don't think I have a pot immediately around that I can repot it into. But I'm going to pull it out so that you guys can see the little bulbs on there. And then I'm going to repot it so that it is in a pot, because it's actually growing out the bottom. You can even see the one root there. And that's a pretty thick root, right? You know, for the size of the plant. So we're going to get this guy out of here. Okay, and this obviously doesn't have as many roots as I was expecting it to. I know, you guys can't even see yet. Hold on, I'm trying to figure this out. Alright, so this has kind of... The soil has all kinds of fallen away from here. But it's got some decent roots on here, and then these are the little bulbs that I was talking about. They look like little potatoes, but this is where the plant grows out of, obviously. I mean, that's how potatoes work, too. The plant grows out of the potato, and then, but it has decent roots on it, and so this plant, really thin stems, really thin leaves, but it's got these thicker root bulbs in here that are holding on to water, right? So this guy doesn't need as much water as some other plants, because it is holding water in these little bulbs. So this is, again, the type of plant where you can probably, you know, kind of let it get a little, it might be a little droopy. And then you know, water it and it will be fine. So this guy, yeah, I was expecting it to be more root bound because it had the roots coming out the bottom, but maybe it just wants a deeper pot. I don't know. It seems like there was plenty of room in there for all of this, and it just didn't like it. It's one of those things. Sometimes you expect plants to do a certain thing and then they do something completely different. So I'm going to see if I have a pot that is about this size that I can put it in that it might like better. Okay, so I'm going to stick this in the middle of the video. I totally forgot to show you guys my orchid roots, which I promised to do because they were upstairs and so I didn't think about them when I was actually doing this. So I have them in a bowl here. Alright, so these are orchid roots. And as you can tell, they're rather thick. All of them. Some of them have shriveled up because I have not been taking care of this plant as well as I should be. But the roots that are healthy are the ones that are nice and plump here like this. And this is why, like I said, this normally grows and it attaches itself to a tree, right? And then the rain gets on the roots, it waters the plant, and then the rest of the time it's just kind of open to the air, right? So the problem that I've obviously been having is that my soil is not airy enough. And so the roots have been the roots have been rotting. That's what happens when you put too much, water next to your roots, is you get rotted roots. This guy got it especially bad, unfortunately, and as you can see, for the size of this plant, it has a very small amount of roots. Number one, I am showing you that, yes, everybody makes mistakes with their plants. And number two, you know, I'm showing you an example of the types of plants that are going to need that orchid mix. I mean, this is an orchid, but the type of plants that need orchid mix are the ones that have these really thick roots on there. So see just how big those are, right? Okay. But those are going to be all the roots that I'm going to show to you. So, in a lot of cases, you're not going to look at roots until you need to. Like, it was the same thing I said in the first video where it's like you don't want to repot a plant until there's actually something going on. The something going on with this plant here was that the roots were coming out of the bottom. The something that was going on with the begonia that I repotted that you saw earlier was that there were roots coming out of the bottom of the pot. I'm going to go into a video later on that's going to talk about diagnosing problems with your plants. Like, if it starts drooping, does it mean you're watering it too much, too little, too whatever? You know, we'll have a video on that. But for right now, still stick with not changing anything about the plant unless there's actually a reason why you think you need to change it. The plant isn't thriving, there's roots growing out of the bottom, you know, something like that. But when you do that, you know, notice things about your plant. Notice what the roots look like when you're pulling it out. You know, notice what the soil looks like. Like, the fact that this soil just kind of all came apart when I pulled this out of it means that it's a nice mix, right? Because there are some pots you'll pull out. I wonder if I have any examples right now. I might not. I have had plants where I will pull it out of the pot and the soil will all be just a compacted ball around the roots, and it's not because there's enough roots holding it in, it's just because the soil itself is so compacted. So you want to pay attention to that. If the soil is just so compacted, then that is a thing that you're going to want to, obviously, you're going to want to replace. It's probably keeping your plant from getting the moisture that it needs, or it's getting too much moisture if it's too compacted. It's one or the other. So just pay attention, right? You know, get to know your plants, get to know what their roots look like. This is the first time in a while I've unearthed this calathea. It came bare root when I first got it, so I kind of saw the roots a little bit then, but they have obviously grown a whole lot. And so now I know, you know, the roots themselves are not that thick. they've got the bulbs on there, which I knew were there. And, you know, now I know a little bit more. These roots seem to like to go down. The roots seem to like to go down as opposed to around. You know, when you saw the alocasia that I pulled out and the roots just kind of went around the bottom of the pot like that, that's more what I'm expecting, because that's how roots tend to go. This one, they just seem to want to go straight down and just keep going down. So, I don't know, maybe that's a thing about Calathea that I did not know before. If you like this video, go ahead and like this video. If you've got any more questions about this, go ahead and ask them in the comments, and I will answer to the best of my ability, or I will tell you that I'm putting out another video. Or both. If you want to see more of these videos, then go ahead and subscribe. And thank you very much for coming to learn more about plants with me today. And I will see you guys in the next video. Okay, bye-bye.